Manana.
Hello, hello, guys.
Hi, hi.
Hi, Radhika.
Hi, good.
Hello, guys.
Good to see you again.
We had a couple of weeks break. Here
Yeah.
we are.
Yeah. Let's talk about our next topic. But
Yeah,
yes, please introduce yourself again.
sure. I'll just put up my
Can you
book,
get it?
which
There you
also
go.
has Radhika is a co-author. Enterprise Blockchain has arrived. There, that's better. You did a better job, Radhika. So we're co-authors of this book, Enterprise Blockchain has arrived. One of the chapters in the book is about the power sector, and we're going to be talking about that today. We've talked in the past. I'm a serial entrepreneur and also been a veteran of Silicon Valley, technologist, Caltech astrophysicist by training, and have developed a number of different startups, some which have exited, and always like to be on the cutting edge. So have been doing that for the last 20 plus years. Radhika and I have been working together for the last 7 years, and we published this book. We have a consultancy and a venture studio, very focused again on the cutting edge, blockchain, AI, IoT, machine learning. And we've talked about healthcare and advanced technologies, talked about fintech and advanced technologies, and where the opportunities are for investors. And we've also, the last time we spoke with you, Manana, we spoke about supply chain. So great to be back and really excited to be speaking about the power sector in just a little bit. Radhika?
Yes,
Thank
about energy, mostly about maybe green energy, because it's so important for the new world.
Yes, definitely. That's the whole thing we'll be talking about.
Yeah.
It's a
Radhika.
very, very important area. Well, Manana, great to be back here with you. I'm Radhika Iyengar, co-founder with Jordan of Starchain Ventures, a venture studio here in Silicon Valley. Also have a consultancy advisory group for blockchain and advanced technologies called Double Nova Group. TEDx speaker, Silicon Valley woman of influence, hugely involved in blockchain and in various sectors like healthcare. Also a member of the California GovOps blockchain working group, advising California state legislature and Governor Newsom. And really looking at the future of what advanced technologies really means. I think this is something that we're both very, very passionate about. Like Jordan, been here in Silicon Valley for a number of years, 2+ decades in Silicon Valley, have really seen the rise and fall of multiple technology waves. But I think that this particular technology wave is not just about blockchain, it's really about the convergence of advanced technologies in general. And what great applications we have in various sectors that we've been discussing in a whole series with you. And today it's really exciting to talk about the future of energy and power and sustainability being a key.
Sustainability.
Exactly. And I mean, here we are in Silicon Valley. I mean, we were just talking before we went live about air quality being so poor because we've got the raging fires going on in Napa Valley, so many wineries at risk, I think, already. And, it's not due to anything but climate change, really, and all of the feedbacks that we're having through climate change. And so, if we are to build a much more sustainable future, we've got to talk about the larger issues of energy usage, that we will go through with our panel. So I think this is an exciting topic. It's very relevant. It's very now. It has to be at the forefront of our minds if we're going to build a much more sustainable tomorrow.
Yeah, sustainable today. I mean, California has been, for much of the summer, nearly unlivable. And that's pretty scary because it's one of the most beautiful places as an environment in the US. So what we'll be talking about, is really, there's a disruption happening in the energy sector and in the power sector.
Because let's talk about what's going on with this sector during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And what is the future for the green energy?
Sure. Well, let's just take a quick look at the maybe like how big is this sector? So there's about $3 trillion spent on electricity globally, right? If you think about all the different countries, they're spending about 3 trillion a year. It's about 750 billion in new infrastructure projects. So 3/4 of a trillion, and that, you know, is pretty pretty continuous over the last, say, 5 years or so. And then if you look at where the investments are coming, so 20 years ago, there was a very small amount that was coming from renewables. The majority was coming from coal, natural gas, and nuclear, right? Some hydro as well. Hydro has always been part of the mix. So if you look at, you know, large hydro as being renewable, that part was renewable. But the vast majority, about 75%, 80%, is coming from fossil fuels, and all of these that are, you know, pumping carbon dioxide in larger and larger quantities into the atmosphere. So what's happened in the last 20 years? Well, in 1997, there was about 8 gigawatts of solar and wind and hydro, or just solar and wind. And in 20 years, that increased 100-fold. So it went from 8 gigawatts to 800 gigawatts. And what we're looking at in the next 5 years is an increase of another terawatt, 1 trillion watts. So you're going to see what happened in 20 years happen in 5 years. And you're going to get up to, you know, probably around 50, 60% of all electricity coming from renewable resources. So there's a very different kind of paradigm with renewables for various reasons. And it's actually a really exciting business opportunity. You know, people think about utilities, they think, oh, you know, electricity sounds boring. But actually, if you look under the covers of what's going on in power markets, it's being distributed and decentralized, right? So I've had solar on my homes for many years, and you can just go out and you can become not a consumer, but a prosumer.
Yeah,
so what's a prosumer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, a prosumer. So you can go out and you can start generating your own power, and then you can start making money off of it. You can, if your state has what's called net metering, you can sell your power back to the grid, and you'll get a certain amount. Sometimes it comes as a credit, sometimes it comes as cash. Different states, you know, there's a patchwork, there's no national strategy in the US. And it varies by country as well. So, you know, it's happening here in the US, but it's also happening in Asia, it's happening in Europe, and it's happening in South America. So there's the ability to now become an energy producer, right? And it's not that expensive, right? You're talking, it used to be that if you were going to be an energy producer, you'd have to spend like $1 billion, right? So, you know, it's a very different model now. You spend tens of thousands.
I think that, you know, if you move just 2 steps back as well and look at the energy sector in general, you know, why is there, of course, like you said, consumption is just going to be accelerating exponentially here, orders of magnitude even. I think that what's really important as we move to that new way of doing things. So first of all, I think the energy sector is really great opportunity in general because it's already going through this disruption. They're already going through massive transformations. They're already realizing that the old way of doing things is just not sustainable. It's not a path we can be on. Look at the environment and all of the things that we're going through right now. So already I think there's a mindset of disruption and of transforming the way we do things. So I think that this is kind of taking it one step further. And then if you look at what decentralization really means for the energy sector, you know, if you think about just goals in general, number one, you're trying to reduce the carbon, right? Output, emissions, all of that. I mean, you're really trying to get better control and much more efficiency into the models. Number two, you know, if you're really looking at equity in energy distribution globally, and I'm not talking here in the United States necessarily, I'm talking just in general, globally. we've got very much of a disparity in the energy haves and the energy not haves, right? I mean, it's really stark reality out there. There are entire global communities who don't even have access to the right amount of energy and power. And if they do, it's spotty and it's very, very inefficient in distribution. So I think that, Jordan, what you're bringing up is a whole new way of thinking about this, because it's really not just about, one entity, I don't know, in the governmental side, one entity that is authorized to distribute this energy to everyone, but it's about a collective community coming together and of being able to add to this energy source, if you will, and make it multi-sourced and
yeah, and I'll add another point to that. That was very good, Radhika. The major thing that's happened, because we've had this 100-fold increase, what happens when you get economies of scale? The pricing of everything comes down. So solar, and wind, they've come down. The price of solar panels, et cetera, systems, has come down 70–80%, right, in the last decade. Used to have very large subsidies in order to get what's called grid parity. But in many markets around the world, many areas, the cheapest thing you can install is solar or wind system, right? And it wouldn't be an offshore wind, but say an onshore wind system. So it's now economically more favorable to bring in renewables than to actually have fossil fuels. Actually, in some locations, it's cheaper to shut down an existing polluting coal plant and put in a solar facility or a wind farm, right?
I don't think you realize that.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize how inexpensive it has become. And this is without subsidies. We're not talking about subsidized. This is non-subsidized. Just the costs are so low that it's the cheapest thing that you can do. So right now, it's just going to take off by itself. And if you look at the new generation, 2/3, 3/4, 100% in some cases of new projects for new generation, it's not natural gas. Now, natural gas came up and it replaced coal, and then coal went into a decline, right? And then solar, added to that, and wind added to that. But the Midwest and Texas, those are huge bastions for wind energy, right? They have massive amounts where the grid can be at times 30, 40, 50, 60% of all electricity is coming from wind. This isn't about a red state or a blue state. This is about economics. This is about what's the best source. If you look at Texas historically, a lot of parts of Texas were built with wind. This is like 100 years ago, or 150 years ago. So you're just looking at, okay, how do you make this as inexpensive as possible so that people just can start using it? But then in order to get adoption, if you can open up marketplaces for electricity, for energy, for prosumers, that's really where you can have a whole brand new economy. So what's holding that back? So right now, yeah, there are different, the blockchain world, 2017, you had people that saw this Power Ledger and Dr. Gemma Green and her team.
Who's in our book, by the way.
Who's in our book. In Australia actually has the highest penetration of PV solar. Over 20% of homes in Australia, have PV, which makes sense. It's basically sunny a lot of the year. And so you have this ability to generate your own power. Now, like I had mentioned, regulation is such, and it really is because of grid stability and grid reliability. You don't want to have a free-for-all with electricity, right? I mean, there's a lot of countries where electricity is not reliable. And what does it do to the economy? It massively impacts the ability for businesses to carry out commerce and do things. So you have to have a stable grid. So stable grid is very critical. So you need advanced technology and you need some kind of a system to ensure that you have grid stability. But this is the beauty of where blockchain, AI, and IoT can come together and make not only the grid more reliable than it is now, but much smarter than it is now. The grid right now is not that smart.
If you think about just during the recent fires we've had, not even the current ones that we're in, but recently when we had the fires and the governor came out and said, you know, past 3 p.m., we really want you to clamp down on the usage of power, keep your thermostat at 78, was it? 78,
yeah.
And don't let it go below that, you know, really try. When you think about that, was an appeal. That was a request from the governor saying, this is what we advise, otherwise we just can't have power for everybody. If you think about a model that could incentivize smarter, more efficient use of energy, and incentivize all of us to say, it's not do the right thing, it's incentivizing us, giving us a real, you know, reward for doing the right thing, which currently doesn't exist. There is nothing like that. You know, this is sort of just, well, do the right thing because you want to make sure that not only you, but everybody else around you has access to power, right? What do we do? I mean, look at all of us really tethered to our computers and our life and work from home, and everybody's at home trying to be still connected to the world. Well, what if you have a power outage? What happens then?
Yeah, everything goes away.
Everything goes away. We need power is at the base of everything. Our whole way of life, our whole lifestyle, everything that we do is dependent on power. And so it gets quickly depleted. To be able to do all of the many things we do, multitasking in all the ways that we do, we really are dependent on power. That is at the foundation. So in order to safeguard that foundation, in order to improve the efficient distribution of power in that foundation, that's really part of the entire solution. So it's not just coming up with much more renewable sources. Obviously, there is that push. It's replacing our dependence on fossil fuels. Absolutely. It's reducing our carbon footprint. Absolutely. But at the same time, even with what we have, more efficiently distributing it and making sure that then acts, you know, how everybody has the same access or equitable access to that infrastructure. That's another aspect altogether. And again, this is this decentralized model that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think that's really a critical thing because, you know, there's this concept with solar and in wind in some cases, but mostly solar, of microgrids. You can just spin up a small power station, right? You think about most power stations, they're not small. They take, again, millions, billions of dollars. You need all this permitting. But say you have a small village, or, you know, think about just when you're driving on the freeway and there's like a solar panel that at a construction site, right? You can just spin it up, run some equipment, you fold it down and you leave, right? You didn't have to connect to any grid. You didn't have to, and you'll see it, you know, here in California, you'll have like those speed indicators,
Yeah.
Which will, you know, as you drive by it, it shows your speed. And you know that, you know, it's running solar as well, because you can see the solar panel. So it's really easy, but you can do that for a village, like in Africa or in Southeast Asia. You can do it for a farm. It's very easy. It's what's called dispatchable. You know, it used to be that people would have a generator that's running using, say, natural gas or gasoline or something like that, diesel, and those are polluting, and you run out of fuel and it turns off, right? Well, you know, the sun's going to come up and so it will turn back on. And if you have a battery, right, and this is, you know, Tesla was just talking about battery day, this whole the linchpin for all of renewables is really batteries. Because if you look at it, you know, the wind doesn't always blow, the sun is not always shining, right? but you know, you have water as well. Water is kind of like, you know, with hydro, but you know, you have droughts, you have floods, you have situations where maybe it's not always going to be at the level that you need. But if you have batteries, right, and you have enough of them, it becomes dispatchable power, because sun's not shining, you start drawing from a battery, right? And they did this in South Australia with the Horndale battery. It's a very large battery that was set up by Tesla, and it basically made their entire grid very reliable and very stable. And now the population of Australia is not that high, but they're also doing it in Hawaii. Again, these are not very high, you know, population areas. But what's coming with EVs, electric vehicles, or battery-powered electric vehicles, BEVs, is that you're going to get hundreds of millions of these, right? The projections are that by 2030, you're going to have hundreds of millions. And what are they? They're batteries.
His
right?
latest forecast on his cars, and I think the way that's actually it's going to be really exciting. I mean, we can talk more about vehicle to grid, which I think is another exciting proposition, because the more that we can then have vehicles, if we are going to have vehicles, that is, I mean, I don't know, who knows what the post-COVID era is going to look like. It's going to redefine a lot of different things. But if you are going to have a vehicle and it happens to be electric, it's like, I mean, I have a Tesla and you do too, Jordan. And I mean, imagine if we can use idle time from our cars and contribute back to the grid, and now get something that is a real incentive.
Well, that's a good point, Radhika. You actually, if you look across people, you only use your car about 4% of the time.
Especially
so,
now.
You know, it's parked. It's parked most of the time. Now is probably like 1% of the time.
And that's it.
Yeah, but if you think about it, if you could be making money for your vehicle when it's idle, right? And that's a whole new way of generating revenue. You're not using your car. People aren't driving it.
It's a smarter infrastructure, because it's not reliant on one central source for this energy. It's about empowering really all of us to contribute to a much more powerful, decentralized power infrastructure. This is a really new way of doing things. Empowerment is huge. If I'm incentivized to contribute to this power source, and it's not just, or sources, multiple sources, and I'm provided real benefits and real incentives for doing this, I can use my vehicle to do something good, right? To make sure that we don't have power outages, that we have better backup plans, that we have a much more distributed infrastructure where we have equitable access and provision for everyone to have access to this power. Because as we talked about, that is the foundation for everything that we're doing, right? We can't survive without it. So we're gonna have to do it much smarter and much more thoughtfully. And I think that these new ways of doing things, like the vehicle to grid, are smarter ways, much more empowering ways for us to all to become prosumers, right?
Now, what do you need? What do you need to have an electric vehicle, right? In order to take part in this new economy,
or solar panels, right? Maybe not.
Well, I'm just talking like the vehicle to grid thing. So, sure. Now, you know, the prosumer would have a solar panels on their home. They would have, you know, where they're generating their own power, and then they can sell the power. You have the car, right? And the car can, you know, add, and it's basically mobility, but you also have the ability to take part and sell the power that's stored in the car. And those batteries, and you may also have a battery, right? You could have like a Powerwall or some similar kind of product from other companies. There's a lot of different battery systems that are out there. And so now you have the ability to, even if it's nighttime and you have solar panels, you can sell power, right? Because you have your battery. And the efficiency is high enough so that, you know, 20 years ago, if you were moving power into a battery, you might lose 25% of it just in that process of moving it. But the efficiency is much higher, and now you might only lose a couple percent. So it's pretty efficient, and the prices come way down in terms of the batteries. And if you have a car and it has a battery in it, but now what do you need? You need to have IoT, right? You have to have sensors that tell where that power is. You now need blockchain because you need a source of truth, right? Where is, the power? How much power? What's the ID? What's the ID for that power source? Then you're going to have smart contracts. So the smart contracts are going to be pricing, the throughput. You have a certain amount that you can sell, etc. And then you have AI, and AI can actually help to manipulate the network so that you get grid stability, and that's called a virtual power plant. So VPPs, or virtual power plants, are power plants that are made of distributed energy resources, or DERs, right? So all of these distributed energy resources can make a grid. And this is very familiar to me because about 20 years ago, I wanted to build a cloud infrastructure, but I wanted to do it in a peer-to-peer fashion from people's computers. So what you do in that kind of a network is you build something that is aware of all of the different people that are part of your network. And then you have a source of truth in terms of, and then you have authentication, etc. So, you're using these distributed resources, and this is kind of like SETI at home, and, a lot of these streaming services, etc., that were not centralized. So this decentralized model can actually reduce costs by about 90%. Also, your blockchain reduces settlement times. So if you look at settlement in the power sector, there's constant trading of electricity going on between those that want electricity and those that have electricity.
We talked about the similarities of the financial markets.
Yeah, so this is like the financial markets. So I'm selling and you're buying. Now, the cost in the power sector, because of regulations and the fact that you're dealing with these very large centralized players, in most cases a utility and a power plant, right? The infrastructure that currently is in place is that settlement and the reconciliation process, because everybody has their own database, can be months. It can be 3 months, it can be 6 months to settle, right? So you carry out a transaction. Keep in mind also, with electricity, it has to be used. You can't really store it anywhere. There isn't a battery infrastructure yet. You can do pumped hydro, and there are different things that you can do to store electricity, but by and large, you have to actually consume the electricity as soon as you sell it. So, I use the electricity, but the whole settlement process doesn't happen for 6 months. So that power producer, they have to be pretty well, backed by cash and have assets. It can't be some small player in most cases, because they don't have the ability to wait 6 months for payment, right?
We can talk about even the PG&Es, for example, that are not doing well financially.
Well, they're bankrupt.
They're bankrupt, right? And so
heavily bankrupt.
I think that all of these mechanisms, and what's really exciting, Manana, is that we're talking about the convergence of advanced technologies. So what have we talked about? We've talked about IoT sensors to be able to make sure that the collection of that data is authentic, that it is falsification proof or fraud proof. We're talking about AI to manipulate or optimize what goes on. We're talking about blockchain to secure the data, to make sure that there's no fraud, it's not hacked, it's it's authenticated, all of those things. I mean, if the governor says shut it off at 3 p.m., who's to say whether you actually shut it off at 3 p.m. or was it 3:30 p.m., right? I mean, so to be able to really prove that you did something at the time and timestamp that, all of that involves not only the IoT sensors, but also blockchain to make sure that that's...
Yeah, and maybe I can add one point there. So if you look at the source of truth or the trust, we trust the utility and the meter that's on our home or on the business to be the source of truth. And you get a bill and you pay it. And if you don't pay it, your power is shut off. So the utility is that source of truth. But if you now move to a distributed ecosystem where everyone is selling to in a marketplace, what's the source of truth, right? If I say I sold, 3 kilowatts hours of power to you, and you say, no, you didn't, now you get all these disputes, and the whole system is going to break down because people are going to be stealing power. They're going to be double spending, like renewable energy credits, and you'll get all the issues that you have in the crypto world of why you needed blockchain as the source of truth to make sure that people weren't committing fraud, double spending, tokens, and people would send, to a wallet, and you would, the transaction would only happen when, you have a smart contract when both parties, one party, can actually send like 1 Bitcoin to somebody else, and that person gets the 1 Bitcoin. Once you have this type of a system where it actually operates based on this underlying blockchain source of truth, which has been tested in the financial markets, you can do something very similar in the power markets. But right now, because the only source of truth is the utility, I can sell back to the utility. So I put up solar panels, and it was funny. My neighbor said to me, "Hey, sell me some power. Give me a cent or 2 less, and I'll buy power from you." And I said, well, it's against the law, right? Because who's to know how much I sent you? How much power did I give you, right? I can kind of guess, I could work it off my meter, and how much do you pay me, right? And you could say, well, you didn't send me 10 kilowatt hours, you sent me 5. And I'm like, no, my records show 10. And you say, my records show 5. So you need one source of truth, that's the blockchain. You need IoT, which are the sensors that show that a certain amount of power was delivered, and on the other side, a certain amount of power was received. That then goes into a smart contract. That transaction gets placed onto the ledger, just like you would have with a Bitcoin transaction or a Stellar transaction or something like this. But you're actually moving power. And this is what companies like Power Ledger do. They enable peer-to-peer electricity trading. So now you're not just trading crypto or currencies, you're trading electricity, right? And that can be done in a peer-to-peer fashion. And it can be done, you can join a VPP, it's like a mining pool. You can join a virtual power plant, right? And now your car and your bidirectional charger and your battery and your solar power system, or if you're a farmer and your wind vein, they can all be part of a community spanning or even a regional power grid, right? And it's reliable because there's full visibility to all the different players. And then you can have smart contracts. So the thing that Radhika was talking about is called demand response. Demand response is a huge amount of power. Like when you turn on your air conditioner, you don't realize that 1 million other people turned on their air conditioners, right? And then the power authority is seeing that all of the power is being drawn down right away from what they're producing. So they have like a baseline power, and all of that is being used up. And at some point, they notice that like if this continues to drain down, you're going to run out of power. And what happens then? You get a blackout, right? The entire grid goes down because you're pulling more power than you're currently producing. And then you can get rolling blackouts, right? You can get all these different things where they just say, hey, we're going to just shut all these homes down because we're going to save the grid. 90% of people are going to have power, but 10% won't. And that saves the 90%. So there's all these things that happen. But what if the virtual power plant could say, hey, you know, that extra 10%, we can just pull from the batteries of all the cars that are, you know, in the next neighboring town, right?
Yeah.
Now you have this dispatchable power. Dispatchable power is typically like a, you know, a natural gas power plant, which you can spin up very rapidly. If you have a coal plant or you have a, you know, a nuclear power plant, they take months to turn on, or at least weeks, right? You can't just power them up. So you have this situation where you can actually address real time and automatically. You're not calling up people's homes and saying, hey, can I use your power? You know, you're part of the system. You have a blockchain-based ID, and then you have smart contracts, right?
What's really exciting, and this is, I think, what the game changer is for now, not even tomorrow, as we were originally talking about, we absolutely need it now, is flexibility. I think that, you know, right now what we have is systems and infrastructure that is inflexible, that can't respond real time.
And it's not smart. It's not smart.
It's not smart. It's not efficient. And so you've got all of these current systems that just can't keep up with this dynamic, you know, need for power that we have. And so if we're really going to move to a much smarter, much more efficient system, we absolutely need to avail ourselves of blockchain-based systems, as well as IoT and AI, you know, intelligence, if you will, because what we have right now is just kind of really old. It's just not.
Well, it's like supply chain. I'll just say another analogy. So, you know, you go to the store and the store doesn't know that there are 100 people that are trying to get toilet paper. They understand that, but then the supply chain doesn't know what's happening. Then what happens? You run out of toilet paper at the store and you can't get it for weeks. Same thing can happen with power, right? So you have all these people turning on their air conditioners or their heat. They're just doing things to keep comfortable. They don't realize that there is a huge draw. The power plant is starting to see, wow, something's happening and it has to react, but maybe it can't react fast enough. But if you have, you know, that visibility, that transparency to what is happening real time, where you have sensors throughout, you know, your infrastructure, you know, then you can have this just demand response policy. And again, it's not like you're calling up someone and saying, hey, turn your air conditioner off. You know, what's going to happen is there's a smart contract and it says, hey, you know, I can actually get $5 or $10 or $100 if I turn my thermostat up, right? And that money goes to you because you're part of this demand response. You opt into it. You get a check at the end of the month or real time. Maybe it could settle instantly at the end of the day. You say, hey, I made $100 today, doing nothing, you know, just because I was part of this demand response. So, you know, this system, which is very flexible, obviously much more resilient than what we have now. People are saying, oh, you know, you have renewables and you have all these systems and they're all intermittent. How do you have a reliable grid? Well, you can. You have batteries, you have blockchain, you have IoT, you have AI, you have virtual power plants. All this infrastructure goes in, and then what do you get? You get prosumers, you get trading, right? Everybody can be trading electricity, just like people were trading crypto.
And
right?
I think companies like Power Ledger are really, they're revolutionizing what we can do. I mean, obviously the adoption and the rate at which they're progressing, it's exciting, but it's, you know, it's still relatively slow because there's a lot of other things that need to change too. This bidirectional, for example, the capability to do bidirectional energy, that's something that, you know, we still, not everybody will have possible, right? Being able to receive as well as contribute, right? That's an infrastructure thing. That's a foundational point.
Well, that's government, right? So government says you can only sell back to the utility, right?
Exactly.
So this vision, the only way it's working is in pilot projects where people say, okay, you know, you can have a little community and you can set this up.
We're proving out that it is possible, but there's a lot of other aspects. This is where good technology policy, good legislation by governments, much more forward-thinking models that can embrace new ways of doing things, so that then everybody wins. I mean, this is a hand-in-hand ecosystem involvement, because it's not just a technology capability. It's not just about having the capability of doing something. It's about having policy and legislation that is going to support that activity and make it legal to be able to do that. So, I mean, we're really talking about multiple aspects here to resolve the kind of issues that we're talking about, and to bring about this sort of dynamic, flexible infrastructure that we really need. So yeah, it's absolutely possible, but we need
and there are pilots, you know, there are pilots that have been run. Most of them have been in Europe and Australia, a couple, you know, some in the US. We actually did an interview for the next version of our book.
I think Power Ledger was doing some things in Africa too, right?
Yeah, there's South Africa, I believe, specifically Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand. You have, you know, what's called the Brooklyn microgrid in the US. You have different projects in the US that are, you know, pilots with various authorities across the US, testing out this peer-to-peer, you know, electricity trading capability. And it's been working. And Power Ledger, for example, which is really the one that's doing the most worldwide, is making a lot of progress in moving this forward. Yeah, so
a female CEO, by the way, doing some pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of, you know, again, this is a $3 trillion sector. You have a lot of the infrastructure, you know, Tesla and a lot of the companies that are in the EV revolution are putting in a new base for the power grid. And everything is moving towards electricity and renewables. So what is this going to do? It's going to significantly reduce carbon footprint, which is going to be good, right? It's going to reduce global heating that's happening, and enable states and countries to get to pretty rapidly, even by 2030 is possible. Just the electricity grid, right, is run by 100% by renewables. So,
and that's, I think that you brought up a great point. I just read this morning, you know, that Google has made a declaration that, you know, by a certain, I think it was at 2030, that they're going to be 100% clean energy. And so, because
and their carbon footprint from the beginning is going to be
they've realized that 39% of their usage, you know, is actually from non-renewable, or was it the opposite? It's only 39% that is from renewable sources, and they need to be able to get to 100% renewable sources. And so it's not just about clean energy in terms of the usage and what your sources are. And we already have sort of a capability of selecting a renewable source. We might pay a little bit more as a consumer even to do that. But we do have those.
Or less. You'll pay less in the current regime.
But right now, I mean, I'm talking about, like, if I'm a consumer and I'm buying it from PG&E or whatever, I mean, I'm paying a little bit more so that I know that all 100% of my sources are renewable. So it's a choice that we can make, but then to have this new infrastructure where we now are empowered to be participants, not just consumers. So this whole prosumer capability, and what Dr. Green is doing with Power Ledger, making it peer-to-peer trading, buying and selling of energy, I think that's pretty exciting. I mean, and the capability is there. We need a lot of spotlight on this issue. This is another reason why we're talking about it, another reason why you've written about it. And Jordan, you're you know, a passionate advocate for this area and have been for so many years. So I'm just following sort of in your vision in a way.
Well, you know, I mean, the other half to that. So if you look at energy in general, there's two major parts. There's buildings and homes and all the electricity, right? And then there's mobility, right?
Yes.
There's cars and trucks and planes and boats and all that type of thing. So if you look at cars and trucks, they're being electrified, right? And so that's going to take a large part of just burning carbon in the form of gasoline or diesel and moving it to electricity, which in many cases is not going to be based on coal or natural gas. It's going to be based on renewables, right? Solar and wind, and it makes it carbon neutral. Planes are a little bit harder, right? And boats also harder. Those two combined are probably going to make up about 10% of mobility. But as you get better and better battery technology, you're already starting to see some planes that are short distance that are starting to use batteries. And there are yachts and others that are 100% renewable, you know, based. Even they're bringing back sails on yachts in order to make them, you know, more energy efficient, number one, but also greener. So I think, you know, the whole movement and the future is clear that we're moving to a renewables based, because there's no, you know, it's cheaper, there's no limit to it. And also you use less electricity, you use less of everything. So if you think about all the energy that it takes in order to mine coal and, you know, to mine all of these different resources and then transport them, you have an initial, you know, when you build a solar panel or you build a wind farm, there's that initial cost, but then the power that you're getting, there's no more mining, right? That's taking place. You're not having to constantly refill it because it's refilled by the air and it's refilled by the sun. So the actual amount of energy that you use goes down by 20 or 30%. So as you move to renewables, you actually reduce your power consumption.
Well,
So there's a smaller amount of power that's
it's
needed.
an interesting phenomenon, but I think that these are, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I feel like a lot of the awareness that we are building, I mean, this is why we need to be talking about this issue, is that most people aren't aware of the fact that, you know, if you're building a renewable energy plant, that the upfront cost can be recuperated so quickly, because you're really, I mean, it's a much more efficient model, right? And I think that people are not aware of that. They're not aware of the cost of renewable energy being so low. They're not aware of the fact that there are these new technologies to do these bi-directional capabilities, which is not then going to empower us to be, you know, participants and contributors to the energy sources. So all of these things is about, I think we really need to build awareness. We need to spread the word in terms of what is actually capable, because there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation that's out there. And I think people don't realize that we can do the many things that we actually can today.
Yeah, and even for the centralized infrastructure that we have right now, we talked about settlement and, you know, reconciliation and all this. You can bring in blockchain systems and sensors and all this in order to reduce the cost. Like, you know, like I mentioned, a typical transaction in the energy sector is 100 times more expensive than a typical transaction in the financial sector. So much of that has to do with reconciliation. So if you can remove that, now the whole cost infrastructure, the cost base for the power sector goes down by a very large percentage. So you can apply blockchain and IoT and AI to the existing power structure. You can expand it out to get this whole distributed and decentralized. Then you take it into the billion people that don't have power, right? You can spin up virtual power plants. You can, you know, make all the people that are in a village actually contributors to the economy, because they have a solar panel and they're making money by providing power to the village.
Financial
right?
empowerment.
And they can have an app, right? And if they make a lot, maybe they sell it to the next neighboring village, and the community, gets together and has their VPP, and now they can become a net power producer. So you generate an economy just because you have sunlight, right?
Yep.
So where do you have sunlight? Africa has a lot of sunlight, right? Southeast Asia has a lot of sunlight.
Yeah.
So you get to places that are supposedly resource poor. It's like a desert. It's resource poor. What are they going to do? How are they going to make money? They generate power, right? And they can start selling it, not just to themselves, but to their neighboring areas.
This is exactly the point that I find so exciting, is that it's really rebalancing our power and energy infrastructure so that it is much more equitable, much more inclusive globally in terms of who's producing and who's consuming. And I think those are the kinds of mechanisms we need to be thinking very quickly, because we need to be bringing everybody into this equation. It's not just about the haves and the have-nots. I really do think this is a global conversation.
Yeah, and I think there's also another very important thing that, people, if you would build all these solar farms and all these wind farms as big centralized, government-backed facilities, it takes up a lot of land, right? You have all these siting and you have all these different issues. But if you put it on somebody's rooftop, it's not taking up any more room, right? So you have all these rooftops or windows or what have you. And, people can generate power and you're not using any additional space, right? What do you use your roof for? It's not really used for much, right? In most cases.
Even with the additional space, you've got, you mentioned Africa. In Morocco, where I grew up, you've got in the south of Morocco, it is basically the desert, it's the Sahara. And you've got these large expanses of space. There's nothing on it. Full baking heat of the sun. Now we're converting into those previously underused and non-used expanses of land, and we're putting that into a very good contributing resource. I think that's magnificent. And we can, as we move towards this climate changed reality and we see much more arid places on Earth, I think we can actually utilize those fast changing environments and landscapes and put them into a much more productive use of land. And so, I think in the urban areas, Jordan, absolutely you're correct. We need to be sensitive about not using more land, more real estate. There has to be a much more intelligent way of doing things. So I think making use of vertical structures, the rooftops, for example, et cetera, those in more urban environments, I think those are very, very good points. You're absolutely correct. But in rural areas, the large expanses of areas that we have, areas that are currently desert, I think we can actually use those in a much more intelligent fashion. And so I think this future that we're building is something where all of us are collaborating as a global community for a global infrastructure that is going to be giving us much more equitable access to energy as a basic foundational resource that everybody needs.
Yeah.
So it's really exciting,
and like you were saying, it basically, we've talked about financial inclusion, and usually you think with financial inclusion, you're giving some people something, and they're, sewing something, or they're making, some jewelry, or maybe they have a small business, but they can become an energy trader. Right? They can become a power producer, right? So
it's look like the commodities. Yeah, it's look like the commodities. Yeah, but what is the next opportunity for the retail investors or maybe family offices? What do you think?
Well, there's this whole decentralized power infrastructure and VPP systems that are based on blockchain. there are, you know, standout companies like Power Ledger and others. There's, you know, the Energy Web Foundation. There's different pilot projects that are being set up, you know, around the world in different markets. And startups are often the ones that are at the forefront of bringing in this technology. So I think in order to make it become more widespread, it's kind of a chicken and the egg. You need more of these companies that are doing pilot projects and showing the regulators that it's actually safe, right? And you're not going to destabilize the grid. But I think it's kind of like with renewables in the first place. People were like, well, you know, renewables are intermittent. They have different, a very different kind of energy kind of footprint in terms of how you deal with it, and you know, when it comes on, when it comes off, and the power is constantly, the amount is constantly, it's very variable, right? It's a variable energy source. So they said, okay, well, let's bring in, we could probably do 10% of the grid and it'll be okay, right? Mm-hmm. We can probably buffer against it with everything else. And then they were like, hey, I think we can do 20%. We can do 30%. And there's days, you know, during this summer here in California where we had 100%, you know. It's not like it's 100% for the whole day, but it's 100% for, say, the, you know, from 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 or whatever. So you have, you know, people beginning to realize that they can work with these systems. And this isn't even with, you know, a lot of advanced technology. So it's the same thing. These startups will be able to take on board a couple percent, right? It's like with the, another analogy with finance and the crypto markets. It's like, you know, the major governments are saying, well, how destabilizing this is crypto to the global monetary system. And they do an analysis and they're like, well, it's a couple percent. It's not really that destabilizing, right? So we're not really going to worry about it. So, you know, we need some regulation, but you know, it's okay to go on the way it is. And then it's going to get to the point where there's enough capacity that now it starts to become significant, like what's happened with renewables in different markets. And then you have to start to become much more geared. There's a transition, right, where you get power outages and there's brownouts and there's rolling blackouts and there's things like this where people are trying to transition from a base load type of a system to a much smarter you know, technology-based energy infrastructure. And so there's a lot of startups. So I think, you know, just like if you look at crypto, you had, you know, the coins, the tokens, the projects. There's going to be those, right? But then there's going to be exchanges. You're going to have these energy exchanges which are going to come up, right? Like Coinbase and Binance and others. And you're going to have these exchanges for electricity, right? As people become prosumers and can have access to generating power. You have to in order to make it more efficient as a marketplace. So there's going to be, in the early phases, there's going to be those that are putting in the infrastructure, right? Yep. And then as time goes on, yeah, then you're going to have sensor companies, you're going to have those that are doing the virtual power plants.
I would say it's such a rich field because it takes a lot for all of this to work. There's so many different facets to this. So I think that whether as an investor, you're looking at investments in infrastructure, which initially, as Jordan pointed out, are going to be the big opportunities, or from a technology standpoint, like I said, this bi-directional capability, that also is an opportunity and it's a very necessary component. So if you look from an investment standpoint, look at all of the necessary components for us to be able to march towards this decentralized energy distributed future, which actually needs to be today. You know, I think that the opportunities are almost limitless. I mean, there's so many different aspects of things that need to come together. So, you know, it matters where your personal preferences are. Are you the type of investor that wants to invest on the consumer side of things or on the infrastructure and the enterprise side of things, there's actually opportunities on both sides, because both sides are going to have to come together to create this bi-directional infrastructure we were talking about. And so I think that from an investment standpoint, lots of opportunities on all sides. And then, you know, working arm in arm with governments and to facilitate that. I mean, just spoke at a conference in Chile yesterday, and
how it was. Yeah, how it was.
Oh, it was great conference. And you know, one of the things that came up was the role of government in all of this. And so if you look at the government of Chile, their regulatory body, their power regulatory body, the Comisión Nacional de Energía de Chile, I mean, they, you know, already explored a pilot 2 years ago for a blockchain-based energy system based on Ethereum. So I'm not sure where they're at in that deployment, but I'm just saying that already you've got governments and regulatory bodies themselves looking at blockchain-based systems. And why would they do that? Because there is fraud, there are security issues, there's lots of fundamental issues that really, where blockchain is the best fit. So I think from an investment standpoint, you've really got capacity on all sides to play and become an active participant in enabling this next generation of infrastructure.
Yeah. Singapore, for example, as well, we haven't talked much about renewable energy credits, but renewable energy credits are incentives that give people the ability to sell the power and then sell the credit, right? So it incentivizes you to use green energy or to produce green energy. So if you look at, you know, RECs, renewable energy credits or certificates, they typically are only traded very thinly between large entities, because you need like a megawatt hour, which is a lot of power produced in order to be in the market. And then the whole audit process and settlement process is very onerous. Verification of these is considerable fraud. So what you can do is you can move to a blockchain-based system, which they've done in Singapore, and you can democratize it. They wanted to open it up to people. So you drop it from, you know, a megawatt hour to a kilowatt hour, right? Which is a small amount of electricity. And now everyone can play. And then you take out the central bureaucracy and you put in a smart contract-based exchange. And now people can start trading these RECs, right? And so they have been working on this, and it's been quite successful in Singapore. Singapore is a small country, but still it's an advanced economy, and they've been quite successful, and they want to open it up to cross-border. So and South Korea has put in place in Busan a virtual power plant, right? Yeah. And then they've spent a few $1 million to get that up and running, again, blockchain-based system. So there's a number of very large European energy firms that are looking at peer-to-peer trading within, you know, their communities in order to reduce costs, because again, the cost infrastructure is very expensive. So in all of these cases, they're working with startups. So, you know, we can go into more detail into these startups and what they're doing. But the one impediment right now is just the fact that it's like with crypto in the early days, is that there's, you know, regulation against it, you know, saying peer-to-peer trading is not allowed.
This is why I said that this is a multi-pronged sort of process. We need good technology policy that is going to enable this innovation to happen and move much more responsibly in that direction by supporting this activity and making it legal to do things, right? I mean, legality is going to be ultimately something that is extremely important in these regulated industries, whether it's healthcare, whether it's financial markets, whether it's, power and energy. These are all regulated industries. So you absolutely need pro-innovation regulation that needs to be in place. But you know, I do think that from an investment standpoint, the opportunities are really rich right now in this sector, and it's something that we are very excited about ourselves.
What is your favorite case? Yeah, what is your favorite case in impact investment in energy sector?
Well,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah, because it's I know
we've been talking about it throughout, really, Manana. I mean, from the beginning. I mean, the lack of equity in this space. You know, Jordan, you alluded to this. You know, it's kind of like financial inclusion. There's power inclusion. How do you enable large populations that don't have access to good or reliable access to electricity and power be able to move forward? I mean, how do you, I mean, this is we talked about this being a foundational element. If we want to make sure that these disenfranchised populations around the world have an opportunity to participate in a modern economy, that power access and reliable sources of power become crucial. The conversation is very, very crucial. So if you talk about who are the haves and who are the have-nots don't have access to power, reliable access to power. And it's not optimized at all. So I think that from an impact perspective, if we really want to bring all of these populations become modern participants or participants in this modern economy, in this modern global infrastructure, we're going to have to open up the gateways on reliable sources of energy and, you know, consistently reliable sources of energy.
Yeah, I think it's those billion people, right, that don't have access to electricity. And think if you didn't have access to electricity, how different your life would be, all the things that you couldn't do. There's so many things that you wouldn't be able to do. I mean, everything that we do is dependent on electricity, like Radhika talked about. And so, you know,
think about education even, you know, think about education, think about healthcare, think about housing. These are the big three when you think about, you know, emerging markets and those areas where there's this lack of proper distributed energy. All of those activities rely on reliable sources of energy. If you don't have good sources of energy, how can you educate a new generation of children successfully? And you know, if this is a post-COVID era, does that mean that we're now going to be moving into a more online you know, form of education? How do you enable that into a community that doesn't have access to power? You can't even think about it, right?
No.
They don't have access to it. How can it be?
So like you said, I mean, education, healthcare, et cetera, they all rely on to have good foundation, you know, and remote, right, access and things like this, and getting online, et cetera. It all depends on power. In most of these places, it's not going to be connecting them to a grid. It's not going to be about putting some polluting, noisy, you know, old diesel generator, you know, which is often what they use, and breaks down all the time, and then they run out of fuel and all these types of things. You put in place a small grid for of solar, and now people can have light at night, right? Yeah. They can have stoves that aren't polluting, right? Because a big part of the pollution in rural parts are these polluting stoves. They don't have electric stoves. They run on kerosene or wood or diesel or, you know, something like this, which creates, because it's in an enclosed environment, a huge amounts of lung and respiratory problems, usually in mothers, you know, who are cooking and doing stuff with their kids.
All areas. This is why I said it's housing, it's healthcare, it's education, and all of it relies on energy, good, clean energy, as a matter of fact. And so,
clean energy, but easily accessible, right? You know, so if I can just put out and I have a battery, if I have a solar panel, well, if I have a solar panel, I can use it while the sun is shining, right? Yep. Think about like those calculators that you had as a kid that had, you know, a solar panel on them. If there's no light, it doesn't work, right? You can't use them in the dark. So, but if you have a battery infrastructure, now you can, get more power than you need during the day, store it, and now you can use it at night, right? So this gives you the opportunity to have 24/7 power. And now you have an infrastructure so that people can charge their phones, they can charge laptops, they can, use electric cook stoves, they can, just have a light so that they can carry on activities at night if they want to do some kind of work because it's no longer dark. They don't have to work by starlight or moonlight.
It's really important for the remote work.
Yeah, exactly. It's critical.
That's what I'm saying. That this is in many ways, I think this COVID era that we're in is a game changer. It's really making us rethink everything. And I think everything is up for renewing and renewal in a brand new way. I mean, I really do think that the opportunities here and now, the opportunities for transformative technologies to play a role in a much more sustainable way of living. I think the opportunity for that is here and now. The opportunity to level the playing field and to democratize access to energy globally. I think that opportunity is here and now. So
there's that digital divide, right, Radhika? So those, it's the haves and the have-nots, but you have those that can get online and those that can't. And it's not that they don't want to, it's just that they might have a device, but they can't charge it, right?
Let's not even look at, some remote part of the world even, anywhere that we're at. I mean, there are the haves and the have-nots. That digital divide exists regardless. And so, but I think that, from a power and energy standpoint, if I may be so bold.
That's a very stark digital divide.
If I may be so bold to state it, I think the opportunities in areas like India, rural India, or in Africa, I think that we have an opportunity to leapfrog entirely, bypass the old way of doing things entirely, and start with a much cleaner, more distributed and democratized energy infrastructure, which then opens up all manner of access for these communities.
Well, for example, Kenya said that they're going to be 100% renewable this year, right? I mean, they're like, if you don't have a lot of infrastructure that's already in place, you don't have to replace, right? You just build.
Yeah.
This is what is exciting, because they're not tethered to these fossil-driven systems that we're tethered to, right? They have a blank slate. So why not leapfrog entirely and go into a brand new, much more efficient, sustainable way of doing things, and a better way of life, and a much more exciting, I think, from a standpoint of empowerment. I think that's a funny word to say, or a funny phrase to say, but energy empowerment, I think, is really the phrase of the day when you think about that. And I'm thinking, wow, if Kenya can do it, awesome, right? And
well, you look at South America, right? South America is like typically 60 to 70% running on hydro, right? Yeah. They're not using fossil fuels that much. And rather than, saying, oh, with that 30 to 40%, we're going to put in a new, diesel plant or a new natural gas plant, you just go straight to wind and solar. And so now that 30 to 40%, you've got hydro plus, more renewables, and it's less expensive, and it's, less upkeep, and then you open up this, distributed and decentralized capability for the citizens, et cetera. So you can open up, new economic opportunities. So anyway, there's a big bright future. Is it going to be like tomorrow? It's in process. It's moving a little bit slower. The reason that we've talked about this after, talking about fintech and talking about healthcare, and talking about supply chain too. Yeah, it's not.
What is the next big thing for the UN and like the sustainable goals?
Well, the 17, SDGs, right? There's a lot of that is can be linked in part. I mean, power is going to be a big contributor to, you know, there's this divide, right? If I want to educate and I can't get online, how do I make my education world class? You know,
Yeah.
I have to go out into the market and get somebody in person, you know, and it's a lot harder with COVID and all this, because in person is, I think, just like you've seen an acceleration of everything online because of COVID, you're going to have to get an acceleration of power in order to enable online, in order to get, you know, so power becomes a very important part of the equation in many of these cases. And, you know, and it needs to be reliable power. It's really an infrastructure that is critical for reaching a lot of the SDGs, because, like Radhika was talking about, it helps to bridge and provide parity and to put people on a more level playing field. If you have power and I don't, you have an inherent advantage over me, right? Because you're going to live a better life than I probably will. Unless, of course, it's from fossil fuel polluting systems, then maybe your life becomes worse, but which is what we're seeing. But if you can, you know, shift it to renewables, then you can make it more sustainable.
I think that's the imperative. That we don't have a choice. We have to do it. We are already seeing devastation on all fronts from a perspective. So we absolutely have to move to a sustainable way of living and to renewable energy sources, 100% reliance on renewable energy sources.
And it's all doable.
And it's all doable. Everything exists. It's a matter of, well, as Greta Thunberg says, political will. There's that involved. And so I think for a lot of things to move and accelerate, we need good legislation, good government, I think, to enable this as well. And so that's an exciting future. But I think from an investment standpoint, I think there's so much opportunity, and for us to be able to have the kind of impact that we want to have globally, it's here and now.
Yeah, and microgrids, I think, could be a big part of that. You know, not these major, you know, you always hear about the World Bank's putting in some massive new dam and, you know, leading to millions of people having to relocate and, you know, submerging, you know, untold hundreds of thousands of acres of land and things like this. You put in a microgrid, right, in a number of different locations, you don't have any of those impacts. People don't have to relocate. You're not, you know, submerging land.
There's no environmental impact.
No, there's always going to be some, but it's much less, right?
Okay,
and
by relativity.
But the other thing is now you make it community-based. You give ownership to the people, right, rather than, you know, some central government or some outside organization. And now people can actually start taking part in their economy, and it can generate jobs. It generates entrepreneurship. It does a lot of things that you, in a decentralized way, from the bottom up, that you don't get with these big centralized systems.
Have we covered the gamut of?
I think we have. That was fun. We probably need to go.
Terrific.
But thank you, Manana. It was a great talk.
Thank you. Thank you for this time. It was amazing conversation. What is the next? Smart city or education?
Education.
Education sounds
education. Or maybe something about actually enterprises.
Sure.
All of
entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Or maybe next goal is family offices. Yeah.
Yeah. Why not?
Let's talk.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's talk.
See you.
All right.
See you guys next time. Yeah.
Okay.
And thank you for coming.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Stay safe.